When you work at a university, life can feel like a bubble. Everyone knows everyone else, and whispers carry faster than the speed of light. For me, it had been a bubble of comfort, until it wasn't. My wife, Clara, was perfect on paper, beautiful, charming, with a laugh that could light up a room. We had been married for 10 years, and while our relationship had its ebbs and flows, I thought we were happy. Or at least content. Things started to shift subtly, like the changing tide. Clara seemed more distracted, more distant. She started dressing a bit sharper, laughing a bit louder at jokes that weren't mine. I chalked it up to a new fitness routine and her book club gatherings, until I overheard the first comment. It was during a faculty meeting. 2 of my colleagues, Andrew and Max, were murmuring in low voices at the coffee station. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but my name came up, followed by a laugh that set my nerves on edge. "Man, if he knew, he'd lose it," Max said, stifling a chuckle. Andrew nodded, smirking. "But can you blame her? She's a firecracker. Total dynamite." It took a second for the implication to sink in. Were they talking about Clara? My Clara? I wanted to burst in, to demand an explanation, but the rational part of me held back. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe they weren't talking about her at all. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. That evening, I casually mentioned Max and Andrew to Clara, watching her reaction closely. She laughed it off, her smile dazzling as always. But there was a flicker, something almost imperceptible that gave her away. A hesitation. I let it slide for now. But the doubts had taken root. I didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of the end. The next few weeks felt like a slow-motion descent into paranoia. Every glance, every offhand comment from colleagues, every late-night book club meeting Clara attended made my suspicions grow. But I needed more than gut feelings and whispers. I needed proof. One evening, I pretended to be swamped with grading papers and told Clara I wouldn't be able to join her at the faculty mixer, a casual event I had planned to attend. Her reaction was almost too enthusiastic. "That's fine, sweetheart," she said, practically glowing. "You work so hard. You deserve a night to relax." I felt the first crack in my resolve. Relax? How could I? But I forced a smile and kissed her goodbye as she left. Then, instead of settling in with my red pen and papers, I slipped out the back door, got into my car, and followed her. She drove across campus to the Humanities building, where the mixer was supposed to be. I parked a safe distance away and waited. Sure enough, I saw her step out of the car in her favorite red dress, one I hadn't seen her wear in months. She looked stunning. For a brief moment, I felt the pang of the love I once had for her, until I noticed Andrew waiting by the door. He leaned in too close, whispered something in her ear that made her laugh and lightly slap his arm. The casual intimacy between them was unmistakable. My knuckles tightened around the steering wheel, but I stayed put, watching as they entered the building together. I wasn't ready to confront them, not yet. The next day, I decided to confront Max instead. He was always the more reckless of the two, the type who'd let his ego run his mouth. We crossed paths in the staff lounge during lunch. I cornered him by the coffee machine. "So," I said, keeping my voice even, "you and Andrew seemed to be having a good laugh the other day. Something about a firecracker?" His grin faltered, but only slightly. "Oh, you heard that, huh?" He chuckled nervously. "Just joking around, you know how it is." "Do I?" I pressed, my gaze unwavering. "Because it sounded like you were talking about Clara." Max's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. "Look, man, don't take it the wrong way. It's just guys being guys. You know how women can be, friendly, flirty. No harm in it." The way he said it, so flippant, so dismissive, sent a chill down my spine. He wasn't denying it outright. He was brushing it off, as if this kind of behavior was par for the course. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just a stray comment, or a one-off incident. This was a culture, a secret world within the university that I hadn't seen until now. I walked away without another word, leaving Max to fidget nervously. But the seed of my plan was already taking shape. If Clara thought I was clueless, I'd use that to my advantage. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to uncover every sordid detail, and when the time came, I'd make her, and everyone else, pay for it. After my conversation with Max, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just whispers and flirting. Clara wasn't the type to leave loose ends, and if she was involved with Andrew, or anyone else, it would be well hidden. I needed to find the cracks in her facade. That weekend, I played the doting husband. Breakfast in bed, a surprise trip to the farmer's market, and even a romantic dinner. Clara responded with the warmth I'd come to expect, but there was an edge to her interactions, like she was performing. I had never noticed it before. Now, it was glaringly obvious. That night, when she fell asleep, I retrieved her phone. Clara had always been protective of her devices, but she'd grown lax over the years. Her passcode hadn't changed since the day she set it, our anniversary date. Once inside, I scrolled through her messages. Most were innocuous, chats with friends, reminders, and work emails. But then I found a hidden folder in her photo gallery labeled Work Notes. It struck me as odd. Clara wasn't particularly organized, and she rarely created folders for anything. I opened it, and my heart sank. The photos weren't explicit, but they didn't have to be. There were selfies with Andrew at what looked like a bar, his arm around her waist. A candid shot of her laughing, holding a glass of wine. Another of them at a faculty event, standing closer than necessary. And then, a screenshot of an email exchange. Andrew, tonight was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. Clara, me either. Can't wait for the next one. The timestamp on the email was from the night of the faculty mixer. My hands shook as I backed out of the folder and locked her phone. I placed it back on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me. But instead of breaking, I hardened. They thought they were clever, hiding their affair in plain sight. But they'd underestimated me. I wasn't just going to expose them, I was going to destroy everything they valued. The following Monday, I made my move. I stayed late at the office, under the pretense of preparing a lecture. Instead, I set up a keylogger on Clara's laptop. It wasn't difficult, she often left it in her office, and I had full access. Every keystroke, every password, every message she typed would now be logged and sent directly to me. That evening, Clara was unusually cheerful. She kissed me on the cheek as I cooked dinner and chattered about her day. It was almost enough to make me doubt myself, almost. After dinner, she excused herself to get some work done, and disappeared into her home office. I waited until she was out of sight, then checked my phone. The keylogger was already working. I watched in real time as she typed out an email to Andrew. Hey you? Can't stop thinking about last week. Same time tomorrow? I clenched my fists, the words burning into my mind. Same time tomorrow? How many times had there been? How long had this been going on? But I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed more than emails and photos. I needed to catch them in the act, to leave no room for denials or excuses. That night, I slept in the guest room, claiming I had a headache. Clara didn't protest. If anything, she seemed relieved. And as I lay there, staring at the blank walls, my plan began to take shape. This wasn't just about catching her, it was about making sure she felt the weight of her choices. Her and Andrew. And anyone else who had laughed behind my back. They thought they could humiliate me? They hadn't seen anything yet. By the time Clara left for work the next morning, I was already 2 steps ahead. Her email to Andrew had confirmed their plans to meet later that evening. This time, I wasn't going to settle for snippets of evidence. I needed something definitive. Something they couldn't weasel out of. After she left, I scoured her laptop for more details. The keylogger had captured everything: messages, calendar appointments, even passwords to apps and accounts I hadn't known she used. Among them was a reservation confirmation for a boutique hotel just outside campus. Room 204. The time? 7 p.m. It was perfect. I called in sick at work, claiming I had food poisoning, and spent the rest of the day preparing. First, I called a private investigator. It wasn't cheap, but I knew I'd need a witness to make this airtight. I explained the situation, and the PI, a gruff man named Greg, agreed to meet me near the hotel that evening. Next, I visited an electronics store and purchased a discreet recording device. It was small enough to hide in my pocket, yet powerful enough to capture audio through a closed door. I didn't want there to be any ambiguity when this came to light. By 6:30 p.m., I was parked down the street from the hotel, my heart pounding like a war drum. Greg was already there, sitting in an inconspicuous sedan with tinted windows. He nodded as I approached his car. "You ready for this?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, though my stomach churned with nerves. "They're meeting in room 204. I need you to document everything." "You got it," he said, pulling out a camera with a zoom lens. I returned to my car and waited. At 6:55, Clara's car pulled into the lot. She stepped out wearing the same red dress she'd worn to the faculty mixer, her heels clicking against the pavement. A moment later, Andrew's car arrived. He got out, adjusting his tie, and the two of them exchanged a brief but intimate hug before heading inside. The rage bubbling inside me was almost unbearable, but I stayed put. I had to see this through. Greg followed them inside, maintaining a safe distance. I waited in the car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. At 7:10, my phone buzzed with a message from Greg. "They're in the room. I've got photos of them entering together." It was time. I grabbed the recording device and headed inside, my pulse pounding in my ears. The hotel lobby was quiet, the front desk clerk barely glancing up as I walked past. I took the elevator to the second floor, my hands trembling as I hit the button. When I reached room 204, I paused, pressing the recording device against the door. At first, there was nothing, just muffled movement and the faint sound of voices. Then laughter. Clara's laughter. My chest tightened. It was the same laugh she used to have for me, back when we were happy. Hearing it now, directed at someone else, felt like a knife twisting in my gut. But I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time to lose control. I knocked on the door. For a few seconds there was silence. Then Andrew's voice, low and confused. "Did you order something?" I knocked again, louder this time. Footsteps approached. The door cracked open, and Andrew's face appeared. His expression shifted from annoyance to shock when he saw me. "What the?" I pushed the door open, stepping inside before he could stop me. Clara was standing by the bed, her face draining of color as she realized who was standing in front of her. "Ryan?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't say a word. Instead, I pulled out the recording device and held it up. "Say hello, Clara. Or should I call you and Andrew the university's best-kept secret?" Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no sound came out. Andrew, for his part, looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. I stepped back into the hallway, leaving the door open. Greg was already there, his camera clicking rapidly as he captured their stunned faces. "Smile," I said coldly, turning back to them. "This is going to be your legacy." Clara lunged forward, trying to block the camera. "Ryan, please don't do this!" I held up a hand, stopping her. "Save it. You made your choices. Now you get to live with them." Back in my car, I reviewed the footage Greg had captured. It was damning, clear images of Clara and Andrew entering the hotel together, their expressions when I confronted them, and even a snippet of their voices through the door. It was everything I needed. As I drove away, I felt an icy calm settle over me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity. And this was only the beginning. The evidence I had gathered wasn't just for my satisfaction. It was a weapon, one I intended to wield with precision. That night, I spent hours compiling everything: the photos, the emails, the messages, and the video Greg had taken. By the time I finished, I had a dossier so comprehensive that no one could deny the truth. The next morning, I took a personal day from work and put my plan into motion. The first target was Andrew. He had built his reputation at the university as a charismatic, reliable professor. Students adored him, faculty respected him, and administrators leaned on him for mentorship programs. He was, by all accounts, untouchable. Until now. I drafted an anonymous email and attached key pieces of evidence, photos of him with Clara entering the hotel, the emails they exchanged, and even a snippet of Greg's footage. The email was addressed to the university's ethics committee, with copies sent to the dean and the provost. The subject line was simple: Code of Conduct Violation, immediate attention required. I hovered over the send button, letting the weight of the moment settle over me. This email wouldn't just expose Andrew. It would strip away the veneer of respectability he had cultivated so carefully. He wouldn't just lose his reputation, he'd lose everything. I clicked send. Next, I turned my attention to Clara. This wasn't just about professional consequences, this was personal. She had humiliated me in ways I couldn't have imagined, and I wasn't about to let her walk away unscathed. I drafted a second email, this one addressed to the members of her book club, her closest friends, and even her family. It included the same evidence but with a more personal touch. I detailed how long the affair had been going on, how she had lied to me repeatedly, and how her actions had shattered the life we had built together. I added one final note. To everyone who thought Clara was a shining example of loyalty and love, I suggest you reconsider. Before sending it, I hesitated for a moment. This wasn't just revenge, it was a declaration of war. Once I sent this email, there would be no going back. But then I thought of all the times she had laughed in my face, lying with such ease. I hit send. The fallout began almost immediately. By noon, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Messages from colleagues, friends, and even Clara herself flooded in, each one more frantic than the last. I ignored them all, watching from a distance as the dominoes began to fall. Andrew was the first to crack. A memo from the ethics committee circulated later that day, announcing that he had been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. Whispers spread through the faculty like wildfire, and by the time I arrived at work the next day, Andrew's name was synonymous with scandal. Clara's response was less public but no less chaotic. Her friends began texting me, asking if it was true. Her sister left a voicemail, crying and apologizing on Clara's behalf. Clara herself sent a string of desperate texts. "Ryan, please, we need to talk. You don't have to do this. Think about what this means for us. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Can we fix this?" Each message only fueled my resolve. Fix this? How do you fix a marriage built on lies? That evening, I went home to find Clara waiting for me in the living room. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. She stood as I walked in, wringing her hands nervously. "Ryan, please," she began, her voice trembling. "I know you're angry. I know I hurt you. But can we just talk about this?" I stared at her, the woman I had once loved more than anything, and felt nothing but cold detachment. "Talk about what, Clara? How you've been sneaking around with Andrew? How you made a mockery of our marriage?" She flinched at my words. "I never meant for it to go this far. It was a mistake." "Stop calling it a mistake," I snapped, my voice sharp. "A mistake is forgetting your keys or burning dinner. What you did was deliberate. You made a choice. Over and over again." Her eyes filled with tears, and she sank onto the couch. "I know. And I'm sorry. But Ryan, we have a life together. We can't just throw it all away." "You already did," I said, my tone icy. "The moment you chose him over me." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing on the couch. I didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. Just empty. But this was far from over. Clara and Andrew weren't the only ones who had laughed at my expense. There were others, and they were next on my list. As I uncovered more of Clara and Andrew's affair, it became clear that their betrayal wasn't an isolated act. The whispers, the smug looks from certain colleagues, the inside jokes, they weren't coincidences. I was the butt of a cruel joke, and the joke was bigger than I'd thought. Andrew and Clara had allies. People who knew, people who laughed behind my back, and people who covered for them. They'd made me a caricature, a naive husband oblivious to the games being played right under his nose. I wasn't just going to take down the ringleaders. I was going to dismantle the entire circle. Using the keylogger I'd installed on Clara's laptop, I tracked her emails and messages over the next week. It didn't take long to identify the enablers, colleagues and acquaintances who had known about the affair and kept it a secret. Some had even encouraged it, judging by the tone of their messages. One particular email exchange between Clara and another professor, Lisa, caught my attention. "Lisa, saw you two at the mixer, looked cozy. Be careful though. Ryan's not as clueless as he seems. Clara, relax. He's busy with his lectures and grading. He'll never know." Lisa wasn't just complicit, she was reveling in it. The next step was to gather evidence of their complicity. The keylogger provided access to their email threads, and with a little digging, I found group chats filled with innuendos and jokes at my expense. They'd turned me into their punchline, and the rage I'd felt toward Clara and Andrew spread to them like wildfire. I crafted another series of emails. This time, they weren't anonymous. I attached the damning conversations, highlighting each person's role in covering up the affair. The recipients? University administrators, HR, and even the board of trustees. The subject line read, "Toxic culture among faculty, urgent action required." In the email I wrote, "The enclosed evidence reveals a troubling culture of unprofessional behavior among faculty members. This isn't just about infidelity, it's about the degradation of workplace ethics and the betrayal of trust within our community. I trust you'll handle this appropriately." Once again I hit send. The fallout was immediate. Lisa was the first to feel the heat. An emergency meeting was called with the department chair, and she was placed on leave pending an investigation. Other names in the emails, those who had laughed, joked, and covered for Clara and Andrew, began to panic. By the end of the week, whispers of disciplinary action and forced resignations were spreading across campus. I walked through the university halls, feeling the weight of the stares. Some were sympathetic, others nervous. The enablers avoided me, their faces pale as they scurried away like cockroaches exposed to light. One colleague, Mark, cornered me in the staff lounge. "Ryan," he said hesitantly, "don't you think this is going too far? People are losing their jobs." I cut him off, my voice cold. They didn't think it was going too far when they laughed at me behind my back. They made their choices. Now they get to live with the consequences. Mark's mouth opened and closed, but he had no reply. He left quickly, his shoulders slumped. At home, Clara was a shadow of her former self. The once confident, vibrant woman I had married was now withdrawn and jumpy, constantly checking her phone for updates on the chaos I'd unleashed. She knew what I'd done but didn't dare confront me. What could she say? That I was wrong to expose the truth? One evening, she finally broke the silence. "Ryan," she said softly, her voice trembling, "what are you going to do next?" I looked at her, my expression unreadable. "You'll find out when everyone else does." Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. I walked away, my resolve unshaken. I wasn't finished yet. There was still one final act to this play, and it would leave no stone unturned. The university buzzed with scandal. Administrators scrambled to contain the fallout as the emails I had sent rippled through the faculty. Clara and Andrew were the epicenters of the storm, but the shockwaves reached everyone complicit in their betrayal. Resignations were rumored. Suspensions were confirmed. And yet I wasn't satisfied. The damage was professional, yes, but it wasn't personal enough. Clara had destroyed the life we'd built together. Now, I was going to dismantle hers. The first step was to target her social circle. Clara had always been the shining star among her friends, charming, witty, the one everyone admired. But admiration was a fragile thing, especially when cracks began to show. Using the messages I had uncovered, I crafted a dossier that painted a very different picture of Clara, a serial liar who had manipulated her way through friendships and relationships. I sent it anonymously to her closest friends with a simple note. "This is the real Clara. Thought you should know." The reactions came swiftly. Messages from her friends piled into her phone, first expressing disbelief, then anger. I overheard one voicemail from her best friend, Mia. "Clara, I don't even know who you are anymore. Don't call me." By the end of the week, Clara's vibrant social life had all but evaporated. The group chats she used to dominate were silent. Her invitations to events dried up. She was alone, just as I had planned. Next, I turned my focus to Andrew. His leave of absence from the university wasn't enough. He needed to understand the full cost of betrayal. Andrew's wife, Lauren, was a quiet, reserved woman who rarely attended faculty functions. But I had her email address, and I decided she deserved to know the truth. I compiled the evidence, photos, messages, and the video of Clara and Andrew at the hotel, and sent it to her with the subject line, "You deserve honesty." Lauren's response was immediate. Within hours I received a curt reply. "Thank you for telling me. This explains a lot." The next day, Andrew's car was conspicuously absent from the faculty parking lot. Whispers circulated that he had moved out of his house. His nameplate on his office door vanished shortly after. But there was one piece of the puzzle I hadn't accounted for: Clara's family. Her parents were kind, traditional people who had always treated me like a son. I struggled with whether to involve them, knowing the pain it would cause. But in the end, I decided they had a right to the truth. One evening, I drove to their home and knocked on the door. Clara's mother, Evelyn, answered, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Ryan!" she exclaimed. "It's been too long. Can I come in?" I asked, my voice strained. "Of course, dear." She led me into the living room, where her husband, Robert, sat reading the paper. "What brings you here?" he asked, setting down his mug. I hesitated, then handed them a folder containing the evidence. "I thought you should know what's been happening." They read in silence, their faces growing more pained with each page. When they finished, Evelyn looked up at me, her eyes brimming with tears. "I don't understand. How could she do this?" "I wish I knew," I said quietly. Robert's jaw tightened. "We raised her better than this." "I'm sorry, Ryan. You don't deserve this." Their sorrow wasn't satisfying. If anything, it deepened my own. But at least they knew the truth. When I returned home that night, Clara was waiting for me in the kitchen. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face pale. "My parents called," she said flatly. "Good," I replied. "They deserve to know." She let out a hollow laugh. "You're destroying me, Ryan. Piece by piece. Was that your plan all along?" I met her gaze, my expression cold. "You destroyed yourself. I'm just making sure everyone sees it." Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, I saw genuine defeat in her eyes. She didn't argue or cry. She simply nodded and walked away. As the days passed, the storm I had unleashed began to subside. Clara moved out of the house, taking only a few boxes of belongings. She left a note on the kitchen counter before she left. "I'm sorry. For everything." I stared at the note for a long time, feeling nothing. The house was quiet now. Peaceful, in a way. But the emptiness was heavy. The life I had known was gone, replaced by something colder, harder. I had won. But at what cost? The silence was oppressive. For weeks, the house felt more like a mausoleum than a home. I had torn Clara's world apart, and in doing so, I had dismantled my own. I didn't regret exposing her lies or holding her accountable, but the aftermath left me hollow. At work, the tension was palpable. Andrew's suspension had turned permanent, and whispers about Clara's scandal were everywhere. My colleagues either avoided me or offered awkward, hollow sympathy. The bubble of camaraderie I had once enjoyed was gone, replaced by isolation. Then came the letter. One evening, a plain white envelope appeared in my mailbox. There was no return address, but the handwriting was familiar. Inside was a single sheet of paper, with just a few lines written in Clara's careful script. You got what you wanted, Ryan. I hope it was worth it. I still love you, even if you hate me. But there's something you need to know, something I couldn't say before. You might not be the only one who's been lied to. The letter ended there. No explanation, no signature. Just that cryptic message. At first I dismissed it as a ploy, a desperate attempt to claw her way back into my life. But the phrasing gnawed at me. You might not be the only one who's been lied to. What did she mean? I couldn't ignore it. The next day, I started digging deeper into Andrew's life. It didn't take long to find something curious, a series of rumors about his relationships with students. Nothing confirmed, just whispers. I reached out to a few former students, framing my questions as concern for potential misconduct. Most of them brushed me off, but one student, Emily, responded hesitantly. I don't know what you're looking for, she wrote, but let's just say Andrew wasn't always professional. Especially after a few drinks at faculty parties. Her words added another layer to the web of deceit. If Andrew had been involved with students, Clara might not have been his only indiscretion. And if Clara knew about it, her letter might have been her way of distancing herself from something darker. I reached out to Greg, the private investigator, and asked him to look into Andrew's history. Within days, he uncovered a string of troubling incidents, complaints that had been quietly dismissed, inappropriate messages exchanged with students, and even a formal warning on his record. Meanwhile, Clara's cryptic letter continued to eat at me. I finally decided to confront her directly. She had moved in with her sister, so I drove to their house one evening. Clara answered the door, looking worn but composed. Ryan, she said, her voice a mixture of surprise and caution. What are you doing here? I got your letter, I said, holding it up. What did you mean? She glanced over her shoulder, then stepped outside, closing the door behind her. I thought you might figure it out on your own, she said softly. But I guess I owe you an explanation. Just tell me, I said, my patience thin. Clara sighed, crossing her arms. Andrew, he's not who you think he is. I found out about some things after we got involved. About students. About how he manipulates people. He's done this before, Ryan. To other women. I'm not the first. Her words sent a chill down my spine. And you're only telling me now? I didn't know how to tell you, she admitted. By the time I realized who he really was, I was already in too deep. I didn't want to admit I'd been fooled. I stared at her, anger and disbelief warring within me. So you're saying you cheated on me with a predator? Clara winced. I didn't know at first. But yes. Her admission left me reeling. I had thought I understood the scope of her betrayal, but this revelation added a new dimension to it. Andrew wasn't just an adulterer, he was a predator. And Clara, whether knowingly or not, had become part of his pattern. I left without saying another word, the weight of her confession pressing down on me. The war I thought I had won suddenly felt far from over. Clara's revelation changed everything. Andrew's betrayal wasn't just personal, it was systemic. His predatory behavior extended far beyond my marriage, and the university's quiet dismissal of complaints suggested complicity at higher levels. If the administration had been covering for him, it wasn't just Andrew who needed to be exposed, it was the institution itself. The next morning, I contacted Greg, my private investigator, and shared what Clara had told me. I need you to dig deeper, I said. Find any students willing to talk. Look into how the university handled past complaints. Greg's voice hardened. If this is as big as it sounds, it might ruffle more than a few feathers. That's the idea, I replied. While Greg worked his leads, I returned to campus with renewed focus. The whispers and sidelong glances no longer bothered me. My colleagues could gossip all they wanted. I was done being the victim. I quietly reached out to trusted students and staff, those who might have witnessed Andrew's misconduct. Many were hesitant to speak, but a few opened up, sharing anecdotes of uncomfortable encounters and inappropriate comments. One former student, Lily, agreed to meet me in person. She was nervous but resolute as she recounted her experience. "He invited me to his office hours," she began, twisting her hands in her lap. "At first, it was just normal academic stuff. But then he started complimenting me, how I looked, how mature I was for my age. It escalated from there." "Did you report it?" I asked gently. Lily shook her head. "I didn't think anyone would believe me. He's charming, you know. Everyone loves him. I didn't want to ruin my reputation." Her story solidified my resolve. Andrew's charisma had allowed him to operate with impunity for years, but I was determined to end his reign. Greg's investigation bore fruit within days. He uncovered a troubling pattern: 3 official complaints filed against Andrew, all quietly dismissed by the administration. The complainants were either persuaded to drop their cases or silenced with non-disclosure agreements. Greg even found one former administrator willing to confirm the university's strategy of protecting Andrew to avoid bad press. Armed with this new evidence, I reached out to a journalist at the local paper. She had covered university scandals before and was eager to investigate further. I handed over everything: emails, witness testimonies, Greg's findings, and let her take the lead. The article broke 2 weeks later, and it was explosive. The headline alone was enough to send shockwaves through the campus community. "Revered professor accused of predatory behavior, university complicit in cover-up." The story detailed Andrew's history of misconduct, the administration's attempts to shield him, and the toxic culture that had allowed him to thrive. Clara's name was mentioned only briefly, her affair framed as a footnote in the larger narrative. The focus remained squarely on Andrew and the institution that had protected him. Within hours, the university issued a statement condemning Andrew's actions and pledging a full investigation. The Board of Trustees announced an independent review of the administration's handling of complaints. Andrew's career was in free fall, his reputation irreparably tarnished. As for Clara, the article brought her little solace. She called me that evening, her voice trembling. "I didn't know it would go this far," she said. "You should have thought about that before you got involved with him," I replied coldly. "You're right," she whispered. "But thank you for exposing him. At least some good came out of all this." I didn't respond. Whatever good had come of it wasn't for her. It was for the victims Andrew had left in his wake. The fallout extended beyond Andrew. The dean and several administrators resigned under pressure, and faculty morale hit an all-time low. Students organized protests, demanding accountability and reforms to prevent future abuses of power. The university's reputation, once pristine, was in shambles. I watched it all unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. I had set the wheels in motion, but the outcome felt bittersweet. The life I had known was gone, and while I had achieved justice, it came at a steep cost. One evening, as I sat in the quiet of my now empty house, Greg called me with an update. "Andrew's lawyer is pushing for a settlement," he said. "They know they can't win if this goes to court." "Good," I said. "Let them pay." Greg hesitated. "And Clara? What about her?" I paused, the question hanging in the air. Clara had been a willing participant in Andrew's betrayal, but she had also helped expose him, albeit unintentionally. In the end, I decided to let her be. She had already lost everything: her marriage, her friends, her reputation. There was nothing more I needed to take. "Leave her out of it," I said finally. "She's not worth the effort." Greg grunted in agreement. "Fair enough. Take care, Ryan." As the call ended, I realized I felt lighter, as though the weight of the past months had finally begun to lift. The storm was over, and while the wreckage remained, I had emerged from it stronger. For the first time in months, I allowed myself a small smile. It wasn't the ending I had envisioned, but it was one I could live with. With the fallout behind me, I found myself standing at a crossroads. The university had become a battlefield of whispers and scandals, a place where every hallway reminded me of betrayal. I couldn't stay, not in a place so tainted by what had happened. It was time to move on. I handed in my resignation a week after the article broke. The dean's replacement, a weary man with a reputation for cleaning up messes, tried to convince me to stay. "You've weathered the worst of it," he said, folding his hands on his desk. "Your reputation is intact, Ryan. If anything, you've come out of this stronger." But I shook my head. "This place isn't home anymore. I need a fresh start." He sighed but didn't argue. "If you ever change your mind, there'll be a place for you here." I thanked him and walked out of his office, feeling a sense of finality. For the first time in months, I wasn't angry. I wasn't scheming or uncovering lies. I was just done. The weeks that followed were a blur of packing and farewells. I sold the house, too many memories in every room, and moved to a smaller town a few hours away. The local college was hiring adjunct professors, and while it wasn't a prestigious position, it was a chance to rebuild. To start over. Teaching again felt like stepping into a new life. The students were eager, the faculty untainted by the scandals of my past, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. One evening, months after the move, I received a letter. The envelope bore no return address, but the handwriting was familiar. Clara's. Inside was a single sheet of paper, her words simple but heavy. "Ryan, I've thought about reaching out 1,000 times, but I never knew what to say. I've hurt you in ways I can't undo, and I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life. I know you've moved on, and I won't bother you again. But I needed to say this. I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. For everything. I hope you find happiness again. You deserve it." I read the letter twice, then folded it and placed it in a drawer. I didn't feel the rage or sorrow that had consumed me before. Just a quiet acceptance. A year later, life looked different. The ache of betrayal had dulled, replaced by a sense of peace I hadn't thought possible. I had made friends, found joy in my work, and even started dating again. It wasn't easy, trust didn't come quickly, but I was learning to open my heart again. One afternoon, as I sat in my new office grading papers, a thought struck me. I had survived. The lies, the betrayal, the chaos. I had faced it all and come out the other side. Clara and Andrew were distant memories now, their actions no longer defining me. They were chapters in a story that had led me here, to a place where I could finally breathe. And for the first time in years I felt whole.